All right, so today we're going on a deep dive into something that's really going to make you think. Online relationship advice. We're going to start with this Reddit post that just blew up. I mean, thousands of comments. And it all started with one husband's discovery. He found intimate photos on his wife's phone, and they weren't meant for him.
Yeah, it's a situation that I think really taps into some universal anxieties, right? That fear of betrayal, the questions about trust and intimacy in a relationship.
Absolutely, and I think the sheer volume of responses to this post tells you just how much this resonated with people. So we're diving into all these diverse perspectives to see what we can learn about modern relationships, and especially all the anxieties that they produce. You ready to get started?
Let's unpack this.
All right, so the original poster, he's clearly distressed. He's using a throwaway account, which already tells you something, right? He finds this folder of photos, his wife in various states of undress. And he even mentions specifics like pose shots, full nudity makeup heels. This wasn't just a casual mirror selfie.
Right, that level of detail, it really suggests intentionality. These photos were carefully crafted, and that alone raises so many questions. Who are they for? Why were they even taken?
And the comment section, oh man, it went wild. So many of the men commenting, they jumped right to the cheating conclusion. Some of them were pretty blunt about it too, like, dude, get a lawyer.
It's almost a knee-jerk reaction,
Yeah,
you know? The presence of these images, it automatically equals betrayal for some. But I think it's worth exploring why that is. Do so many men struggle to grasp the concept of a woman taking intimate photos for reasons other than sharing with a partner?
That's a really interesting point. Are you saying there might be a blind spot there, a lack of understanding about why a woman would create these images for herself?
It's possible. We often project our own understanding of intimacy onto others, and we just assume that their motivations align with ours. But men and women can really view and use intimate imagery in very different ways.
And this is where the conversation gets really interesting. Because amongst all those cheater accusations, another perspective really started to emerge. Women started sharing their own experiences, claiming that they also take similar photos, but not for the reasons many men were assuming.
Right, this is where we start to see the complexity of the issue. It challenges those assumptions about intention, and it forces us to at least consider alternative explanations.
For instance, some women said they take these photos as a confidence boost, a way to appreciate their own bodies. Others mentioned body checking, tracking changes over time, even just documenting a particular phase of life.
Right, it highlights the diverse ways that women engage with their own bodies and sexuality. It's not always about pleasing someone else or seeking external validation. Sometimes it's a very personal and private act.
Yeah, some women even talked about keeping these photos almost like a visual diary. One woman mentioned documenting her body through pregnancy, weight fluctuations, aging. It was about owning her narrative and celebrating her body through all these different stages.
That really challenges the idea that these photos are always about seeking someone else's gaze, right? It almost reframes it as an act of self-love and acceptance.
But not everyone was buying it. Some men, and even some women, expressed skepticism. They accused women of making excuses for potentially unfaithful behavior. It seems like there's a double standard at play here.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. It raises an important question. Would the reaction be the same if the genders were reversed? If a woman found similar photos on her husband's phone, would the assumption of cheating be as immediate and widespread?
That's a really thought-provoking question, for sure.
It makes you wonder about the deeper societal expectations and biases that shape our perceptions of men and women's behaviors, particularly around sexuality and intimacy.
It gets even more complicated when you factor in the internet. As we dug deeper, we found some women admitting to taking these photos and sharing them, but not necessarily with a romantic partner.
Ah, yes. This is where we start to see the influence of online communities and the desire for validation from a much wider audience.
Exactly. There were women talking about these private online groups where they share these intimate photos with other women. They're getting compliments and feeling this sense of belonging.
It highlights the powerful role that the internet plays in our lives, both in how we perceive ourselves and how we connect with others. It can be a space for exploration and validation and even a sense of community. But it also raises questions about the impact of those online interactions on our self-esteem and even our real-life relationships.
So we've got this whole mix of motivations and interpretations swirling around, and it all stems from this single Reddit post. And like you said, it really exposes the complexities of modern relationships, the influence of technology, and the often conflicting ways that men and women navigate intimacy and self-expression.
Absolutely, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
That's right. There's so much more to unpack here. So what do you say we take a quick break and come back to dig even deeper into this fascinating conversation?
I'm all for it. This is getting really interesting.
Welcome back. We're diving deeper into this Reddit post about a husband who found intimate photos on his wife's phone. And we've already uncovered some fascinating perspectives, and it seems like there's a lot more to uncover. So what really stands out to you so far?
Well, I think what's most striking is the range of reactions and the underlying assumptions that they reveal.
Hmm.
It's clear that men and women often approach intimacy and self-expression in very different ways.
And that those differences can really lead to misunderstandings and conflict, especially in the age of social media, where the lines between public and private are increasingly blurred.
Exactly. And speaking of social media, I think it's worth exploring further the role it plays in this whole situation. We touched on the idea of women seeking validation online, but I think there's a deeper layer to unpack here.
Okay, let's go there. When we left off, we were talking about women who shared intimate photos in private online groups.
Right. And while that might seem perplexing to some, it actually speaks to a very human need for connection and affirmation in a world where we're constantly bombarded with idealized images. It's natural to seek validation, to want to feel desirable and accepted.
Especially when those idealized images are often unattainable and heavily filtered.
Precisely so. In a way, these online communities can offer a sense of belonging, a space where women can support and empower each other. They can share their vulnerabilities, celebrate their bodies, and receive compliments without judgment.
It's almost like a counter-narrative to the often objectifying and hypersexualized images we see in mainstream media.
That's a great way to put it. It's about reclaiming their bodies and defining beauty on their own terms. And while some might see it as attention-seeking, it's important to remember that seeking connection and validation is a fundamental human need.
Yeah, you're right. We all crave connection, whether it's online or offline. But it makes you wonder, does seeking validation online ultimately help or hinder our self-esteem?
That's a really interesting question. And honestly, the answer is probably complex and nuanced. On one hand, receiving positive feedback and feeling part of a supportive community can be incredibly empowering. It can boost confidence and help women embrace their bodies.
But on the other hand, there's the risk of becoming overly reliant on external validation. What happens when those likes and compliments disappear? Could it actually make women more insecure in the long run?
That's certainly a valid concern, and it highlights the importance of cultivating a healthy sense of self-worth that's not solely dependent on external validation.
So it's a delicate balance. Social media can offer this platform for self-expression and connection, but it's important to be mindful of the potential pitfalls.
Absolutely, and I think this ties back to the original dilemma we were exploring. The husband's discovery of those photos triggered a wave of assumptions and accusations. But what if, instead of jumping to conclusions, we approach these situations with curiosity and empathy?
What if we try to understand the underlying motivations, the complex interplay of individual desires, societal pressures, and the ever-evolving landscape of intimacy in the digital age?
That's exactly the kind of nuanced thinking we need to encourage, and it starts with recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all answer, no simple explanation for why someone might take or share intimate photos.
It's about acknowledging the diversity of human experiences and approaching these conversations with open minds and open hearts.
Well said.
So we've explored the assumptions, the double standards, the complexities of female self-expression, and the powerful role of the internet. What else can we learn from this Reddit rabbit hole?
I think there's one more crucial element to consider: communication.
Ah, yes. That seems to be a recurring theme in so many of the comments.
Yeah.
The importance of talking to your partner, expressing your concerns, and listening with an open mind.
Exactly. At the end of the day, no matter how much we analyze and dissect this situation from the outside, the only way to truly understand what's going on is to have an honest and open conversation with your partner.
And as we've seen, those conversations can be incredibly challenging. It takes courage to be vulnerable, to express your fears and insecurities, and to truly hear your partner's perspective without judgment.
It's not easy, and sometimes professional guidance can be helpful. A therapist or counselor can offer tools and strategies for navigating those difficult conversations.
So it's not just about talking, it's about talking effectively.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because communication is more than just words. It's about nonverbal cues, active listening, and creating a safe space where both partners feel heard and understood.
It's about building trust and intimacy through open and honest dialogue, even when it's difficult.
And that's a skill that can be learned and practiced. It takes effort, it takes intention, but it's absolutely essential for building a strong and healthy relationship.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, we're left with a lot to ponder: the complexities of modern relationships, the evolving nature of intimacy, and the importance of open communication.
It's been a fascinating exploration so far, and I'm curious to see what insights emerge as we delve into the final part of this conversation. What do you say we take a quick break and come back for the final leg of our journey?
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to see where this conversation takes us next. Okay, we are back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into online relationship advice, starting with that Reddit post about a husband's discovery of intimate photos on his wife's phone. We've explored a lot of different angles, assumptions, double standards, the role of technology, the complexities of intimacy. Where do you think this conversation leaves us?
It's certainly been a thought-provoking journey, and I think ultimately it circles back to a fundamental truth about relationships. They thrive on honesty and communication.
And we've talked about the importance of communication throughout this entire deep dive, but it's worth emphasizing again. Because even with all these insights we've gained about societal expectations and the influence of technology, direct, honest conversation with your partner is still the most crucial step.
You're absolutely right, no matter how much we analyze or speculate from the outside. The only way to truly understand what's happening in a relationship is to talk to each other.
Yeah, and so many comments on that Reddit post echoed that sentiment. Regardless of their opinions on the situation, people emphasized that talking to his wife was the only way for the husband to get clarity.
It sounds simple, but it can be incredibly difficult in practice, especially when you're dealing with sensitive issues like intimacy, trust, and potential betrayal. Emotions run high, and it's easy to let insecurities and assumptions cloud your judgment.
It's tempting to jump to conclusions, to snoop for more evidence, or even avoid the conversation altogether. But as we've seen, those approaches rarely lead to healthy resolutions.
Instead, what's needed is a willingness to be vulnerable, to express your feelings without accusing or attacking, and to genuinely listen to your partner's perspective.
There was one comment that really stuck with me. Someone said, assumptions are relationship killers. And it's so true. We often build these narratives in our heads based on limited information, and those narratives can really drive a wedge between partners.
It's like we create these stories to explain the unexplainable, but those stories can become self-fulfilling prophecies if we're not careful.
So how do we move past those assumptions and actually have those difficult conversations in a way that's productive?
It starts with creating a safe space for open dialogue. That means approaching the conversation with curiosity rather than judgment,
Yeah.
focusing on understanding rather than blaming.
It also means active listening, really hearing what your partner is saying, even if it's painful or challenging to hear.
And it's about being honest with yourself, acknowledging your own insecurities and triggers, and taking responsibility for your own reactions.
Because even if the husband's fears are confirmed, even if those intimate photos were intended for someone else, that doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is over.
Exactly. It could be an opportunity to address deeper issues, to work through challenges together, and to rebuild trust on a stronger foundation.
But sometimes those conversations are just too difficult to navigate on our own.
You're right, there's no shame in seeking professional help. A therapist or counselor can provide guidance and support, offering tools and strategies for effective communication and conflict resolution.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is this: modern relationships are complex, but the foundation remains the same. Honesty, respect, and open communication are essential for navigating the challenges and building a strong, healthy partnership.
Beautifully said. And remember, it's an ongoing process. Relationships require effort, intention, and a willingness to learn and grow together.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into online relationship advice. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want to explore more thought-provoking topics like this, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul. We release new deep dives every week, so hit that subscribe button to stay updated and join our community of curious minds. And for a visual deep dive into all sorts of intriguing topics, be sure to check out Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel. You'll find in-depth explorations, insightful analysis, and a whole lot of food for thought. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.